All right, here we go.
What's good, everybody? I'm Robert Dickens Jr.
This is Ryan Reed.
This is Elanders Frazier.
This is John Gaal, and you're listening to Volta.
Changing the conversation
For percussion educators,
Designers,
And performers. Good morning and welcome everybody to another episode of Volta Percussion.
I don't know. I guess that's morning.
It is morning when they're listening because it drops at 9 a.m. on Fridays. So if they're listening, it is morning time, I guess, unless they don't listen in the morning. It's not morning now, but it'll be morning when they hear it. I guess you want to hear it. But myself, I'm Elanders Frazier. I'm joined by Robert Dickens Jr. and Mr. John Gaal. So Ryan Reed is out of the office today for today's conversation. He'll be joining us on our next meeting. So today we're going to be talking about teaching versus cleaning and what's the difference? What's the difference in teaching versus cleaning? I kind of want to toss this question over to Rob to kind of kickstart. When you think about John, are you upset by this, John? Is this you have a feeling? You feel a certain way about it?
I'll see how it is. I'll see how it is.
We'll get to you,
I'm a
John.
ginger.
You're hey, look, you said it. You gotta wait your turn. Rob, when you're thinking about teaching versus cleaning, what's your thought process and how you, let's say, what's your thought process and how you break that segment apart? Like when you're inside of a season, like where do you decide where teaching stops and where cleaning starts, or does it happen at the same time?
For me, I feel like it's one big long process. The first thing that comes to my mind is like just making sure that when you teach it with clarity. I think a lot of people leave a lot of variables on the table when they're teaching music. Also, I think a lot of times people teach things too quickly. That could be tempo wise, or that could be like how much music you're learning at one point in time. But I feel like if you are teaching with clarity and you're explaining the approach to it properly, as it relates to how it's going to feel in the hands, all the logistics of moving around and playing it, and performing it with whatever other, simultaneous responsibilities that you have, then I feel like that helps you have the same conversation, but on gradually smaller levels as you make it more clean, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Versus like you're having one conversation when you're teaching the music, and then you have a completely different conversation when you're cleaning the music. You know what I mean?
I think though you could also just get too scientific with it, too overwhelming of information of this is how your hands should feel when you're playing this. Maybe those students' hands just aren't capable or ready for that, and they just need to do it. Whether at that tempo or whatever.
I would agree. I mean, I feel like a lot of this is
subjective.
Well, it is subjective, but I mean, like, for instance, like if you're teaching on a drum corps level, I would say like an open class, or if you're teaching on a world class level, like obviously you probably could talk about certain things that you would hold off on talking about. You could talk about those to start off. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, it's very nuts and bolts of like, hey, here's the idea, here's the overarching themes. But like, you could get in a lot of detail up front so that they already know how to approach it, how I should be achieving this. Should I be squeezing for this? Should there be pressure here, this, that, or whatever? Like, what's happening, right? So, but yeah, I agree. I feel like the further you go back on a skill level, like it is a lot more nuts and bolts of like, hey, just bounce the stick 2 times, it's an 8th note, you know what I mean? So, but to me, what I think about is like specifically groups that are like having to do a lot of stuff, and then like there's dense material, and I think that's the biggest thing that I feel like we use the most time, like cleaning, is like, how are you setting up the dense material? How's everyone hearing the phrasing? You know what I mean? Does it go across the bar line? Like, what other checks and things can you provide them with so that as they're practicing on their own and they go their separate ways, like we're all thinking about the music and this dense material the same way.
Because it's not just rhythms and notes, it is music. It is a journey emotionally, sonically. You have to take the audience and the performer and the adjudicator through whatever your show concept is about on your specific instrument. I think also though, like I found sometimes people, at least for me, they try to clean too early, which I guess in some regards is not bad. Let me preface this by saying this is all dependent on your situation and your student skill set, obviously. When you're going to teach and when you're going to clean. Like for me, I find because I'm the kind of opposite from you, Rob. I don't like to give so much information out at the beginning. Like I prefer just lots of reps. And I understand that maybe they're not all like perfect either sound quality or technique or yada yada. I just want the kids playing a lot. Especially at my skill level, which I would say for my students, it's the high school level, and they are upper beginner, lower intermediate, maybe medium intermediate. Building a group. Like for me, I just want them playing because I know I'm still building the culture of they need to go practice by themselves or go play in pairs or whatnot. So the only time I actually get to see them, because school scheduling, work scheduling, parental, scheduling with the kids. Like when I see them, okay, they're mine. But in that 2 hour block or 3 hour block, if I don't have them, then they're off doing whatever they want. So this just play. So we're playing the exercises, and then when we're doing the show beats, like we're talking, okay, it's just this exercise applicable here. All right, and just reps and reps and reps and reps on a loop. And I have found that sometimes I'd say this is the transition point of teaching to cleaning for a full show. Now you probably are already clean. Hopefully, maybe you're already cleaning the first movement of your show. But like I've seen instructors, they do one rep, they stop, and then they talk about it. And in my opinion, it's just like you need to do at least 3 or 4 reps, either on a loop or something, and then talk about it. Because if the amount of time you're talking, and Terry's talked about this before in our Southland percussion meetings, if you're talking more than you're playing, are the kids really getting better or able to apply the concepts that you're talking about? But again, I guess you have to determine, are you cleaning or are you teaching at that point?
I think both of y'all are bringing up very interesting points. I guess where I want to parry the two of you on opposite sides of the conversation, if you will.
We can still be friends, Rob.
Absolutely.
I still like you.
Y'all are still going to be friends, but I kind of want to parry y'all to two different sides of the conversation where, John, it seems like you lean more to the artistic side of how kids interpret or engage with music, whereas Rob, you lean more to the scientific side and science side of how kids engage with music. And how did you arrive at that mode of operations? Like, how did you arrive at that's your approach?
To me, I feel like it depends on whether or not it's something that I wrote or whether or not it's something that someone else wrote. I will say, like, in my experience, being that, I write battery stuff, I help with the program coordination of stuff. And then from the visual side of things, like I do very basic visual facing stuff like that, coordinating a lot of that stuff for my band and indoor drum line. With the visual stuff, like the drill side of it, of like exactly where everyone goes and when they face, I feel like I can teach that clean from day one and make sure that I explain exactly what that is. Like, this is exactly where you go. This is exactly how many counts you have to get there. This is your travel path. Your feet are in time, your feet are out of time, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Those are, I feel like, the most basic aspects of like from a visual side. And then I feel like that also applies to the music, depending on what it is, on how developed that thing actually is. but the more produced you make something and the more variables you add, you do have to kind of come at it from a more collaborative standpoint of, this is the idea that I have in my head. Let's figure out how to make this work, which is going to be more reps based first, as opposed to like, this is exactly what it is. This is exactly what count you come in on. This is exactly where you go and when you face and turn and all that kind of stuff. So I've had situations where that I'm on John's side, and I've also had situations where I'm on my side, which is like, okay, if I'm teaching kids that know a certain amount, then, you know, like this past weekend working with some of my kids, like, it's not acceptable for y'all to scratch rolls at 3 inches just because it's like, oh, we're just not learning this with a drill. Obviously, we're just gonna do it again and we're gonna get more reps. But like, hey, let's not do that, because we don't necessarily need to do that. And again, that's just a personal expectation. Now, am I gonna like stop and like go back and do multiple reps just so that they can figure out how to do the drill without scratching rolls? No, I'm not gonna waste the time, because the idea is like coordinating that so you're teaching, and it's more macro. But at the same time, I am 100% down to remind students that there are certain errors that they don't have to make just because they're in the learning process and it's not the cleaning process. So we're going to clean it later. Like, set it up correctly, because I feel like you can hinder yourself in the cleaning process later on if you allow too many variables to go by undefined and unchecked in the beginning. Like, you're still going to have to come back and clean it. You know what I mean? And they may not digest it all at one time, which to John's point, I agree with. But at the same time, I feel like there's an abundance of people that teach things in a way that's not clear. And from my process, that hinders me later on.
John?
I think I find your observation surprising, because I've always considered myself very mathematical and scientific, especially if I'm in the front. Like, if I'm in my element, I'm just teaching front ensemble. Like, when I see the music, I'm thinking, how many different checks and sequences can I create so that I can just automate this cleaning process, and just know that in time, if we just do these things that I'm setting up early on, by the end result, it's going to be golden. I don't have to worry about that. But when I'm in, let's say, a percussion ensemble standstill rehearsal, I'm thinking more about the musical nuance of, okay, who are you listening for? Who's the primary and the secondary voicing, et cetera, both in the front ensemble and in the battery, right, for that percussion ensemble. So I thought that was interesting. I've never really thought about it from a musical standpoint, because, like, again, context is everything. For my high school, for those that don't know, my numbers, I think I got like 7 kids. So we do standstill percussion ensemble on the front hash. So for me, we're just getting lots of reps of, all right, it's here. My 1 marimba player. All right, my 2 rack players. Okay, let's add the electronics in. All right, my two snares and 1 quad. And I got 1 kid on like a rack who's playing the bass drum part as well. So adding those in, and them understanding musically, okay, this is where we're at in the music. This is where we have to go. To Rob's point, what is the destination? What's the journey that we're trying to take everyone on? I'll define that musically, and then just let it do reps on reps on reps on reps. And then when it's in sectionals, I'll get more into the nitty gritty of, or like private lessons, because my kids are in band class, so I can take maybe a perk student here or there. That's when I get a nitty gritty of technique, of cleaning, of, okay, I heard this in percussion ensemble land musically. Let's dive in and see why that's happening. Why can't we hit this triplet roll, or why our 2 heights are slightly different? All right, here's some exercises. This is what you should be feeling in your hands. This is what you should conceptually be thinking about. And that's where I get into the science of it. But in like a percussion ensemble setting, that's what I'm doing all more music of just teaching.
It almost sounds like both of you always look at the context of the picture that you're in before you decide how you're going to take action, which you should, right? like honest, if you're a good educator, you should always be looking at the context of the situation that you're in before you make a plan. And we've talked about over the history of this podcast how good planning in advance is, right? Specifically as it relates to teaching, right? So I kind of want to dive a little bit more into teaching before we go back to cleaning, because John, I do know you're very mathematical when it comes to how you decisively clean an ensemble, right? When you talk about the teaching, though, in terms of how you fundamentally start players from zero to something, right? I don't want to say 0 to 100, right? Because I don't think as a teacher we ever see a player get to 100, right? We only take them as far as they're going to go with us, and then they go to the next wherever they're going to go, right? So when we start a player from 0 and you're in that teaching process, what do you feel is the method or process that you use, knowing that eventually you're going to get to that cleaning process? But from a teaching standpoint, is there something very specific that you have in mind when you start that teaching process, knowing that the cleaning is going to be coming later on?
Is that a John question or a me question?
I want both of you to answer it, and I'll take whoever wants to answer it first.
I mean, the first thing that I'm thinking about, because the other word that I think of when I'm thinking about teaching is, because of the stuff that I do visually and program coordination wise, is like production. Like, we have to get a certain amount on by a certain time. That just is what it is.
Right.
Now, obviously,
yeah, you got to hit your macro goals.
Yeah, so
timelines.
that's what my thought is when I'm teaching it is, one, do I have enough time to explain it so that they can at least know how to approach it when they practice it? It's not going to be clean, but like, do they understand, hey, on this triplet roll, the most important thing is getting my triplets in time. My diddles, my second note diddles might suck.
Excuse me.
But the goal right now is to make sure that the triplets and these crushed diddles that I'm playing are at least the skeleton is in time. That is the most important thing that I'm supposed to be doing.
Oh, sure.
And if I can do that, that's acceptable right now for this level of what we're trying to go. And if I can get that macro part in time, and then we're also learning the amount of material that we're supposed to learn at that point in time, then that's a success for me on a teaching level. Now, obviously, as the students get more, like they become more skilled, like obviously you can get cleaner faster and you can start to talk about more nuanced things faster. But as your students are in the beginning, it's like, okay, let's all, like Ryan was talking about the other week, like, okay, hey, let's walk around the room in a circle and play some music and clap on 1 and 3. And then clap on 2 and 4 and keep your feet in time or whatever. Like, that is how basic sometimes it needs to be. So my thought is, whenever I'm teaching, is one, make sure that we're on track for the material. Like, make sure we've learned the amount of material that we're supposed to learn. And then two, make sure that the macro idea is out there. Because in a lot of instances, depending on how involved all the elements are, you're going to have to go back and mesh it together in some type way. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, in marching band, when you have all these elements moving around, or in drum corps, like obviously in drum corps, I feel like it's a little bit easier because the staff is so big that one person can already think, oh, okay, well, this prop moves from here to here, so it's going to take this amount of counts with one person moving it. Like, if you're doing that in indoor drum line, and you're the instructor, you might not have that luxury of coming to the rehearsal and being like, I know exactly how long it takes this prop to move from here to here. And then that gives all this time for these people to shift around here. Like, you don't know that. You know what I'm saying? But in the event that you do, you can teach with greater clarity in the beginning, which means you can clean it faster. You know what I mean? You can clean that visual phrase faster. And I think the last example that I think about is, for instance, specifically for indoor drum line and visual stuff, like when you have a color guard person come in and teach some choreography, a lot of times they're not going to teach it to counts. Like they're gonna teach you, okay, hey, this is what happens, and this is the music, or these are the words, and this is the sequence that they go in. But sometimes, like what I've had to do for some of my groups is I've had to come back and me along with the kids kind of create a faux count structure so that we can clean it. You know what I'm saying? But the general idea was already out there, because like last year with my indoor group, we did a show that started with a lot of voiceovers, and all of the choreography went to the words. So you weren't necessarily dancing the counts. So they had to understand how to do it with those sequences. So we had to create checkpoints based on words and the cadence of the words. But there wasn't any way to say 1, 2, 3, 4, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, whatever. So to me, when you're first doing it, it's macro idea all day. Like you got to make sure that you're learning enough in that amount of time, and then just making sure that they understand how to make it sound together.
John?
Can't believe you had your kids listen to the electronics, Rob. That's like 101 pit. No, never listen to the electronics.
We had a speaker that was on side one, and it was loud as well. I can't say how loud it was because this is okay for kids, but it was loud, and it was like right on the back of the on the back of like the racks on that side. It was pointed straight to them, because if they couldn't hear those words, that opening was gonna happen.
Good.
That's funny. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. So when you're considering where you're going to have to go from a cleaning standpoint, and you're talking about taking a student from zero to,
that was it.
Right? How are you approaching the teaching aspect, knowing that cleaning will be coming later on?
I'm going to take this in the context of like a pure beginner. Because you said zero. So in my mind, I'm like, this kid doesn't even know how to hold sticks or whatnot. And even with this, I've changed it every single year, depending on the number of students I've had. And again, the situation. Obviously, this year, with most of the COVID kids kind of moving on through middle school, high school, now they're into the college years. Current beginner students seem to be a little bit more in tune with, pulse, musical understanding right off the bat, instead of having the pull, kicking and screaming. But what I'm trying to say is, at a pure beginner, I guess this comes from my background as a pianist. Like honestly, I don't even remember when I started 5 years, like technical or musical, but I've always just been around my mom and playing piano. So when I'm teaching beginners, like I'm using the Kenneth Wiley book of just association, basically, of what do you know already? Okay, you know what the right hand is, you know what the left hand is. All right, let's just play. Let's pad some stuff with those hands. And I'm talking a little bit with technique, but I'm not going into your finger has 65% pressure going this way, and then your fourth finger is like over here just a little bit. But no, I learned when I actually learned this from a good friend of mine, Manny Flores, when I moved over here to Texas, and I was learning under Dr. West. I was also kind of just doing some gigs, teaching front ensembles and whatnot in the area, just so I get my name out, I get some experience, private lessons. And when he was teaching beginners, was all about pictures and association. So I do that a lot more in my curriculum. I'm not so scientific of, you need to hang on to the stick this far, and this is how much you should be doing mallet wise, and this is the amount of velocity, etc., etc. It's more just like, all right, let's check our front fulcrum. It should be, nails going through. Let's check our cocoons. All right, show me those back fingers, nice relaxed cocoons. And why are we doing cocoons and not squeezing like baby birds? And just different type of associations, even with sounds. When they see the symbols on the page, right, okay, this symbol, you're just going to make a sound. This symbol, shh, don't make a sound. And so we're just playing, because I know if I have a group of 10 kids, as much as I'd love to keep all 10 kids in percussion, they're going to fall out on their own, either because of their work ethic, they're changing priorities, maybe their family moves, etc., etc. So each rep, like we'll be working on, all right, let's count and play these chord notes. Okay, we're doing some rebound strokes back to our mountaintop. Okay, make sure we have that pizza slice. All right, everyone likes different slices of pizza, but let's not get too greedy here. All right, let's have a nice pizza slice. And I'm watching the kids in their garage doors, right? This section of the hand is opening up, or maybe their fingers are flailing off. I'm seeing this stuff, and I'm just like, hey, check that cocoon. Hey, check that garage door. Make sure it's closed. We don't want to get robbed. And so, like, oh, and then they immediately go back to what they have to, and they're playing. And I'm hoping that throughout the year, just those simple associations, I can just say a quick word, they understand what I'm saying, and they go straight back into it. That will clean itself from a technical standpoint, while I'm just teaching them the symbols of music, the language of music, what makes sounds, what don't make sounds, etc., etc. And then as they get to 7th and 8th grade, and this is my approach that's different from other people. I've known people that like they'll focus a really long time on just getting a really good rebound stroke, really awesome technique, good sound quality, and then they start teaching the musical language of quarter notes, quarter rests, etc., etc. For me, I spend probably as not much time because, to be honest, I don't feel comfortable just playing 8 on a hand for 2 weeks straight for 50 minutes every day. Like me personally, I get bored. So I'm just like, all right, let's go to the next thing. Let's start teaching these symbols. So that's probably a lackluster on my teaching, which I get a fault of maybe I go into the symbol learning too quickly, music language, whereas other people, they focus on the technique right off because they know in the long run, they'll learn the symbols eventually. I just want to play. I just want the kid, you want to do percussion? All right, let's just play. So, just different types of approach. If you're starting a kid from zero, I try to add in as much cleaning as I can from a technical standpoint, but I'm okay with it not being the stock, perfect, etc. I think I also get that a little bit from Paul Rennick. I've never had a lesson with him, but I've talked to a lot of people who march on the SCB lines and who go to the UNT. And just every time I see them playing, and we've talked about this too, their approach, player to player, seems different in a lot, but the sound and what they're playing is great. So I think I take that slightly when I'm starting off with beginners, that everyone's different, and it's okay to have some different hands to a certain extent. We don't need to be doing any like crazy weird stuff after on the sticks, right? But I don't know. That's just me. Maybe I talk too much.
Well, you bring up a very interesting point, and something that you said made me wonder, as kind of a follow-up question to you, is how do you think with that approach that you take plays into the process that you take with those students when you're now ready to start moving into advanced levels of cleaning? So
Sure. Yeah. So that's when you're starting to get to the advanced levels, that's when you start hitting a wall, because the technical approach is going to hinder you until they fix whatever issues they have from a drumming or from a mallet perspective. I try my best to always make sure that the technical approach is correct. And I guess with my high school students, I've only had a few people reach the advance of college literature playing. So yeah, I understand that there are some shortcomings to that, and that's when I would encourage that student, if I'm seeing them take that approach of, okay, I want to do this full time, I want to be really, really good. Okay, and let's start doing some private lessons so then we can get that one-on-one time to clean, to fix some of those issues. Because everything I'm saying is in a group setting. It's not the one-on-one of you need to focus on this technical stuff, because I just don't have time to go around a group of 10 to 20 beginners, right, in Texas, especially in Texas, and fix every single person's hands. Because just classroom management, if you're focusing on this one student for an extended period of time, these other 9 to 19 students are jumping off the walls doing whatever, and you could turn on the net and you can program them and teach them to, okay, I'm working on this, you're working on line 5, step 6, whatever. I kind of just lost my train of thought. But yeah, there's an issue, and I recognize that, but I feel like I also know how to fix that if it comes to that point.
What about you, Rob?
Could you repeat the question again?
So
We're
based
scattered
on
brain today.
based on your approach and the approach that you take with students when you're initially starting out from that teaching standpoint, when you start moving into those advanced levels of cleaning, do you notice that there's any drawbacks? Like John just said that he notices that there is a drawback there, but he understands and has an awareness of how to adapt to, address those concerns where he sees that. Do you notice, are there any drawbacks to your approach to teaching when you get ready to transition to cleaning? And then what are those adaptations that you make to when those challenges, come out?
Yeah, I would say the drawback in my approach would just be that things probably wouldn't move as fast. And like John says, like, you're doing certain things, like you can get bored. Like I am the opposite. Like I can sit there and listen to them play quarter note, quarter note,
No,
quarter note,
I can't.
quarter note,
I can't.
quarter note, over.
Good for you, Rob, man. Good for you.
So I mean, at the same time, I think I don't know, I feel like I definitely have both sides of that I've learned from the drum corps aspect of, back in my day marching in the OOs. It's just like the amount of like boring, non-interesting things that we were forced to do to just work on quality. Like that part of my brain just like is like, oh, okay, this is just working on quality. I don't really have to think about this. Like all I'm doing is just making sure that it looks like this every single time. Do it again. And I mean, I think that as far as class is concerned, outside of the drum corps idiom and just like bringing it back to high school, one of the things that I use to break that monotony is music, because there is a part of like getting better that's just not interesting. It just isn't. It's just nuts and bolts.
Technique.
So for me, when it comes down to working on technique, um, like for instance, with some of my high schoolers, one of the things that I do frequently at the beginning of class is like we'll do 4 quarter notes of full strokes and then do that maybe like 4 times and then do downstrokes with 4 in between taps and then upstrokes. And then we do like a little 8 on a hand sequence that adds all those in there so that they work on accent taps and all that kind of stuff. That is super boring and basic. You know what I mean? Like that's not interesting to do at all. So I do try to break that monotony up by using a musical track or switching up whatever the musical, putting it in a different context. Because to some degree, I don't necessarily want them to think about how cool the music is because they have that for the music. I want them to just think about the nuts and bolts. And hopefully the music helps them not like want to, off themselves in the process of me saying, let's do that again. I feel like one of the drawbacks to the way that I teach things in that I do try to give a lot of detail up front, which I kind of try to gauge that based on the students. Like obviously when I'm working with middle schoolers and 6th graders, I'm like, oh, y'all can't understand that fast. So let's just say bounce the stick. That's all we're going to say. We're just bouncing the stick. I'm not going to talk about upstrokes, downstrokes, this, that, whatever. I'm just going to talk about when you throw the stick down and it bounces back. That's it. You know what I mean? I feel like one of my drawbacks to that is that sometimes I can move slower in my teaching. I feel like it kind of makes it up in the cleaning aspect, but I feel like that's a caveat to my approach, is that it does go a lot slower in the beginning. And maybe for some students that's not like as engaging. So I do try to find other ways, like I said, with the music to try to be engaging and like my own personality to try to be engaging with the students, but it is going to be a little boring up front. But like I said, I feel like once we get to the music, there's a lot of excitement to like, oh, okay, now let's do the music. Okay, hey, you remember that thing we were talking about? the reason why you're late on that attack is because you played that as a downstroke and not an upstroke so that you get to the next thing, right? You didn't play that as a full stroke so that you can get to the next whatever. You know what I mean? So at least they kind of get that context, but that's my drawback to the way that I try to think too scientific too soon. So
I think that's funny, Rob, because I remember in my younger years when I was just doing 4 mounts, and I was like, I'm gonna go march calf, I'm gonna go march mystique. Like I would spend, and I tell my students, I spend 8 hours a day during winter break or spring break on the floor, focusing on technique on the pillow or whatever. Like I put in that time so I know technically what that has to do. I think maybe that's one of the reasons why I don't like technique breakdowns as I'm older, because I understand how long it takes. And I've you were talking and it was bringing back memories of me teaching Colts these past couple of years. Like I'm so glad I have other instructors with me as we're teaching, because I recognize, yeah, I don't mind introducing the concepts of the exercises and saying, okay, this is what you have to do to get better. Now go get better. Or just letting the instructors be like, okay, we need a technique block. All right, you go take them. I'll be back when you're ready for music. Because yeah, honestly, it's so important. I don't want to negate that in any way. And yeah, I've played on the floor with music and whatnot, but I find it so boring. It's funny because like even in high school, the high school students, like I'll teach the show beats and whatnot. When we're starting to clean, I'm okay with watching the book. Like, okay, you can't play this now, and it's either your fault because you're not putting in the hours or whatnot, or it's my fault for not teaching the concepts correctly, or overestimating the amount of time it would take, etc. There's so many different variables. I get that, but I also understand that it's okay in the cleaning process to take away some of those variables, whether it's rhythms, dynamics, diddles, flams, all that stuff, because I'll have an opportunity next year to build that skill level and to go back in the off season and work on the technical approach so that the cleaning is more musical and more fun. And I think people who are listening, it's okay when you're cleaning, you don't have to play the exact music that's on the page 100% of the time. You can adapt it for your situation, and you can bring the content score, I guess you could say, down a little bit so that the achievement score can go up, knowing that what E mentioned at the beginning of the podcast of how we all need to be planning effectively, knowing that the actions you're taking in the long run will provide the dividends. But it's interesting that you're mentioning your approach, Rob, because I'm learning more about myself and why I do things just talking to you guys right now. It's cool. E,
Yeah.
what's your approach? You haven't said much this episode.
Well, listening to y'all talk, I feel like I find a very good balance of I think I ride the middle of finding creative ways to make monotony fun for students so that we get a lot of reps on the front end with technical advice in mind to make cleaning easier on the back end. And
Can you provide some examples?
yeah, so with my baseline this year, right? We spent a lot of time in the front part of the summer just working on rotation and working on just how we functionally rotate the stick and the muscle groups that we use to rotate that stick to produce sound. So that now we've got two numbers on the field, and now that we're doing a lot more reps inside of the music, we're not doing technique breakdowns anymore. We're doing more musical based breakdowns to where we're just breaking down musical elements. And this is a conversation I like to have with them, to where we're not breaking down technique anymore. We're breaking down the skill sets that exist in the show. 16th note partials, sextuplet partials, 8th note partials, etc. But as we break down those partials, I am sending them reminders of what we did over the summer with our technique. So it's like, it's always building upon the next thing. So I don't go back and revisit the same things that we did because we spent those hours already, right? But I use the language to say, hey, just because we've already done this, no, we're not going to repeat the same thing, but keep this in mind as we're now doing this. And this is how it relates. So in this current season of what we're doing, we are now trying to fundamentally build consistent sound from player to player as it relates to those individual skill sets that compose the entire book. So that when we go back and put it in the context of the book, we know that every player is giving every note value the proper sound for accents, interbeats, etc. It's the technical foundation has already been set up. That was done over the summer, right? We've worked on a lot of rhythmic accuracy as it relates to the feet over the summer. So now we're just working on how does, the part that you play inside of the book actually relate to the grid, as, both bass drummers will, I identify it as, right? How does the part you play relate to the grid? And then how does your personal contribution sound? Is it in time and is it a full sound? And if you're giving that quality and consistency, right? Because the consistency is important, because we talk about if you're only able to do it for one rep, then what does it mean? And if it takes us 4 reps to get it clean, what does that mean? And I feel like in the front part of the season, I don't talk as much. We do a lot of reps. In the latter part of the season, I talk a whole lot more, because for my students, I want them to really start to increase, like I want their awareness level to skyrocket towards the end of the season, because I understand, like, if they can identify the errors themselves, they don't need me. And if they don't need me, that's the perfect situation, right? Because I can't be there with them on the field, right? And I've always told every group, your recovery level, my idea recovery level for every group that I teach is 3 counts or less. If I can get you to a recovery point of 3 counts or less, then I feel like I've done my job as an educator. I've done my job in recognition. I've done my job in ability. I've done my job in consistency, right? That you have the awareness level to identify when you're out and you can recover in less than 3 counts. That's a task, right? And I'm not saying high schools can get to that achievement level, but that's the goal that we shoot for, is for them to always be able to identify what just happened in that rep, and do I already know how to fix it, right? So we talk a whole lot about awareness, and it's not we have to get 4 reps, but sometimes we'll talk about it immediately after the rep. Sometimes we'll play it 4 times. Sometimes it's like, why did it take 4 times for us to get it to a good version of that? Sometimes it's like, why did we start it poorly? You know what I mean? And it really just depends. And I never want them to start to interpret how I'm going to teach them in that day, because that's the variety element that I bring to them as an educator, is that if they can predict how I'm going to approach today's rehearsal, then the rehearsal is going to get stagnant. When they can't predict how I'm going to approach, meaning I may be cutting off every single rep, I may not be cutting off any rep. You know what I mean? Then at that point, they are always looking to find out, what am I searching for in this moment? And that keeps them mentally engaged inside of the conversation of the particular rehearsal that we're in. And I want them to terribly always be engaged, more so than to be checked out. And then we also have the conversation of being checked out towards the end of the rehearsal, just to make sure that they're consciously aware of, when we have a 3-hour rehearsal, the more opportunities that they leave open for themselves to remain checked out, they're only doing themselves a disservice that is not ultimately benefiting what they're trying to get to towards the end of the season. So
I like what you said. You give them your end goal is to give them 3 counts or less to recover. I'm going to steal that.
do it.
I've always talked to my kids. I'm like, because recovery is part of the game. You gotta recover quickly. And all my kids know that if you mess up, just keep on going. It's okay to make mistakes. You just gotta keep on going, and you gotta recover. But now you've given me a quantitative goal that I can start teaching and preaching to my kids. Okay, yes, the name of the game If you mess up, keep on going. You got to recover. Let's make it a goal to make it 3 counts or less, and whatever
Mhm.
we're doing. And I think when they start seeing that quantitatively, and they're saying, "Oh, it's taking me 7, it's taking me 9 measures, beats. I don't know who knows
Right.
phrases." It's
Yeah.
like, "Oh crap, this is not good."
Right. And the question they have to ask themselves is it as an education thing? Do I not know everything? Is it an awareness thing? Am I just not aware that I was out for that length of time? Do I not even understand how to fix it? Right? Like, I feel like the more that your students know about what it is that they're trying to do, the better that they're going to be able to help themselves. And I think that's what you were alluding to earlier in terms of just how we educate our students is just making sure that from a foundational standpoint, we're setting up a good foundation, but also we are trying to get them to be able to coach themselves, right? Like they
Mhm.
have to have that ability, which is why you do the reps, right? You do the reps so that they can start to find that personal examination in terms of what it means to them as an individual player. And they can't get that if you're just talking to them all the time, right? Like
Right.
all their understanding is this is how I relate to, as Elanders says, or as Robert says, or as John says, but it's never in relationship to themselves. So they need the reps in order to understand what it is in relationship to themselves, but they also need to get the conscious awareness of, well, what does it actually mean? And I think the marriage of those two is what makes a great educator, is when you give them enough exposure so that they can connect the dots for themselves, but you also provide them the awareness so that now they can learn how to fix it for themselves also.
Yeah, I guess just tagging on to that, I feel like one of the most important questions I know that I ask my students quite often is, "Did you hear that?" You know what I mean? Like when I get more yeses than I get like blank stares, like I know that that section of the group is getting better. You know what I mean? It's like when we play something, it's like, "Hey, bass drums, did y'all hear that? What was the issue?" "Oh, okay, people are rushing their partials." "Yeah, so we're not even in our pocket, so we can't even line up the rhythmic accuracy of what we're doing, right?" "Yep." "You guys
Would you
going to the..."
say that stuff is in the teaching category or the cleaning category?
See, that's why I feel like those two things are kind of,
I think it's blurred.
I
They
feel like it's
yeah.
blurred. They're because ultimately, hopefully, if you're teaching them properly, and I think this is more so my idea behind the reason why I teach slowly is because I feel like the most important thing that we teach students is how to practice, how to hear the music, how to approach what it is that we're doing. So I feel like as long as they understand, but I also think obviously you need multiple educators because there's multiple ways, different personalities. Some people, like when they learn music, let's say they have 20 bars of music. Some people are going to take it, okay, I'm going to take it at half tempo and I'm going to do the entire thing and just sight read it very slow. There's some people that are like, I'm going to take it at tempo and I'm going to take one measure at a time. There's some people that's going to be somewhere in between there. None of those approaches are necessarily wrong. They all have pluses and pros and cons, right? But at the same time, we want to give students whatever we feel like as an educator is the best, because obviously that's subjective. Like, what's the best way to learn to, know the music?
Because
So
everyone
that's why I
learns
feel like,
differently.
yeah, but everyone's gonna learn it differently, right? So everyone's giving their own opinion as to like, well, this is something that I feel like you should do. I definitely feel like you shouldn't try to learn it up to tempo immediately. I definitely, you know what I mean? Like there's certain things that we can just immediately rule
I need to
out.
fly you out here and teach my kids
Um,
whenever you want.
I
I'm
mean,
still fighting that battle. It's getting better,
but
but still.
at the same time, like I feel like it's one of those things that like once you get to a certain level of ability, you can start to learn things at tempo because you already know certain things. Now, should you? Probably not, because there are probably nuances that you're gonna miss trying to learn it up to tempo, maybe in phrasing or the way to interpret the music that maybe you might miss. But could you do that? Sure, you could. People do it in auditions all the time. They throw you out some music at a drum corps audition. They're not gonna be like, all right, we're gonna take this like at 50 and the BPM is like 180. Like, no, you have to learn it at a comparable tempo as everyone else and whoever is teaching it. So if they're going to teach it at tempo and they're going to go one measure at a time, like you got to be able to do that. Right. So I think that those two things
that's an advanced skill set.
It is an
It
advanced
is.
skill set. And if you are listening and you want to audition for a drum corps, you need to be able to sight read and learn music very quickly. Period. Like that's just
Sight
a drum
reading.
corps skill set, period. You got to be able to learn and pick things up quickly. So I'm not necessarily saying that I would do that for my high schoolers because all of them don't have that desire to march drum corps or to do something where they're going to expect you to learn the music in a weekend. But I would say that those two things, like we were saying, those two things are married. My thought process is just that it's a macro level to like a very micro level as you go across the season. Like you're talking about the same things. It might be, hey, you need to make sure that you stop squeezing here. Cool. All right. Hey, you guys are squeezing less and you're squeezing in less places. Now you just need to let the stick breathe right here. Hey, you guys just need to make sure, you know what I mean? Like you're saying the same information because it's the same context, same music. So to me, I feel like the teaching and cleaning aspect are married because if you're teaching well, you're teaching the students how to clean the music because they should be recognizing the same errors. They should be catching the same tendencies. And then the next place, they should be learning how to fix those and then also how to combat them so they never happen in general. So you don't have to recover to begin with.
So thankful for these conversations because so often I find myself just in the muck. Like you're in the thick of it. You're on the battlefield. You're teaching, boom, 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 boom. But then when we have these conversations, at least for me, I'm able to like pull myself out of my situation and observe everything. And I'm hearing your perspective. And your perspective, I'm just like, oh yeah, that's what we're doing. It's not just ramming and jamming notes. We are creating opportunities for self-education, both for myself, but also for the students of an awareness level, etc., etc. So it's nice, it's refreshing. So then going into this upcoming week, I could just be like, okay, I don't have to always say the same thing. I can now be like, let's check this perspective. I don't know. I find it refreshing. I guess my last question for y'all is if you had to choose between teaching, cleaning, which one would you like more?
Ooh.
Like for me, I know I'll go cleaning. Just because
Cleaning?
I think at that point it's at an advanced enough stage that you can be lighthearted, a little bit more relaxed, and you can have those higher learning Bloom taxonomy questions and discussions. And for me, I find that very exciting and enjoyable because like everyone can hear the forward momentum. You're not in the thick of it, like I was just mentioning. So for me, especially at the drum corps level, like cleaning, like I really just thrive on that. What about you, E?
So it's very interesting because in the last 7-8 years, this is the first year that I got to come into a drum corps season to clean, and I wasn't on the teaching side of things for the entire year. And I'll tell you, you're absolutely right. Like it's very different because, like you said, like you feel the momentum of, you know, where you're having a very different conversation of cleaning versus teaching. And I'll put it like this because it's, as an educator, I can't pick one, and please don't hold me to pick just one, right? I think that cleaning hands down is more fun because I think that you're already moving at a rate of speed that is faster so that you're not having to, you know, recreate the wheel for a lot of things, but you can take smaller segments of things as you need to. But like you said, the conversation can be as grandiose or as minute as needed for what you're trying to clean. The one thing that I do love about teaching, though, that is what keeps me in education and passionate about education, is the light bulbs that happen when a student is first learning something for the first time. Like that will never get old. It is I've always said it is my video game heart meter that gets filled up on the left-hand corner of the screen. And it gives me a one-up life every time I see a student recognize something for the first time that they've learned, and it's a light bulb that goes off. I absolutely adore it. That's something I always enjoy, but cleaning's a whole lot more fun, but teaching, I think, is where the heart is.
Yeah, I'm gonna say
I was like,
I don't have a heart.
I forgot, John. You are John is the android. You know what John is? John is the Cavaliers 2006 program machine. Yeah, I mean, I would have to agree with E on that. I think it's more so on the backside of like teaching kids like how to. The teaching part of it is rewarding for me. I feel like maybe on a higher level, but like on my personal like ego of like getting excited about talking about higher level concepts, definitely the clean aspect of it. But I feel like the teaching aspect, like it's more delayed gratification because of the fact that, you know, now I look at some of my kids that, you know, hey, this kid switched from saxophone because the band director, and if he probably watches this, he would probably know who I'm talking about him. I had a kid at one of my high schools. The band director literally told me in ninth grade, his ninth grade year, he was like, hey, man, this kid wants to switch to percussion. He's a terrible saxophonist. He sucks. He was like, do you want to take him to play drums or this, that, or whatever? And I was like, all right, cool. Took the kid. He started playing drums. I mean, he's been on the snare line and made the quad line like his second year. Like, he's great percussionist, like gonna be a great snare drummer one day, like just, you know, starting to get there. And like that aspect of it, even though I love the cleaning aspect, like that is something that I take with me that's really special to me too. That like, okay, I got to be a part of this kid's story of like teaching him, you know, sitting in my office and we're working on upstrokes, sitting in my office and we're working on double strokes. This is what diddle should sound like. Okay, now let's play down the rudiment chart. Let's play down the bag. Okay, this is flam accents. Cool. All right, you really want to make this group? Let's start working on your hybrids. Next week, we're going to start chopping out on that. Right? So, like, that aspect of it has been great and it's been the most rewarding. But I will definitely say, specifically speaking from a drum corps season, because the beginning of the season and the end of the season, night and day. The beginning of the season is a lot of teaching. Like it's like asking someone to choose finals week or
teaching
movies.
with spoon feeding.
That on the open class level would agree. Hopefully on the world class level is not spoon feeding, but on the open class level, 100%. I don't know. I can't speak to that. Obviously, it's probably different per group. Hopefully,
yeah,
it's per group, different expectations.
yeah.
But I mean, like the whole front loading side of that, just because it's so much production, there's a lot of teaching. And then also just a lot of like personal education of like, this is the way we show up to rehearsal. Every time we have a bad day, like it, or have a bad block, like it can't turn into a bad day. Okay, you guys got to hustle to the block. You got to make sure that you're there on time. You got to make sure you bring energy every single day. Okay, you've been here 2 weeks now at the camp that never ends. You can't get soggy in your attitude. You actually got to push through, right? This is the most difficult part of the season. Doing all of that is very taxing. But getting to see the cleaning aspect at the end, and I'm speaking specifically for Southwind, like that made the cleaning process and the finals process more rewarding because I was there during the part where they were just like struggling, trying to figure out how to do box 1 through 3 and not break.
Yeah.
You know, so I would definitely say if I had to, my ego would pick cleaning. Okay. My head would pick cleaning. My heart would pick teaching.
Good job.
I hear that. I hear that. I hear that. Yeah, there's something about let's take one note that will just I could go rest with my Lord and Savior, on the let's take one note. All right. Add one. You know what I mean? With fresh-faced kids that have never picked up sticks before, like that, as bad, that note's gonna be bad the first, you know what I mean? Like, but man, it's so cool the first time they pick up those sticks and play that first note, man. It's just like, you don't realize the journey that you just started, but I get it because I've seen it happen so many times, man. That's cool, man. It's such an awesome thing. Awesome. Any other final notes, words? John, you had a final question, but any other final thoughts, comments?
Nah, I ain't got
Questions?
nothing, man.
For those that are listening, what do you like to do more, cleaning or teaching? Send us an email at voltapercussion@gmail.com or comment on one of our YouTube or Instagram posts. Let us know so we can continue the conversation.
Awesome. And you can catch us at Volta Percussion on YouTube. You can also catch us at Volta Percussion on Instagram. We would love to hear from you. So that's going to wrap us up for this episode. We do appreciate you spending some time with us as always. My name is Elanders Frazier. I was joined by Mr. John Gaal and Mr. Robert Dickens Jr. Thank you so very much for spending some time with us, and we hope y'all have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to y'all soon.
Bye.